Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third session for this year's Native People of the Americas Colloquium. The session is entitled Paving the Way, Opening Pathways for Native Film. This colloquium is part of a larger set of efforts that the University of Dayton has been undertaking in order to build connections and forge collaborations with Indigenous communities, as well as to foreground Native voices and perspectives on our campus. My name is Dr. Shannon Toll, and I am an assistant professor of Indigenous Literatures and Cultures of North America here at UD. Before we start today's session, I want to thank my co-chairs, Dr. Teresa Segi and Dr. Tom Morgan, for their work in helping to put together this year's event, especially under these pandemic conditions, and to thank our sponsors of Native People of the Americas Colloquium, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, the Multi-Ethnic Education and Engagement Center, the College of Arts and Sciences, the Race and Ethnic Studies Program, and the Department of English here at the University of Dayton. We would also like to thank Medicine Bow Forge. More importantly, I want to thank all of our presenters for this year's colloquium, specifically for the work that they are doing to bring visibility, awareness, and change to the ongoing settler colonial violence that continues to impact Native communities and nations. So a few housekeeping things before introducing our speaker for this afternoon. First, questions are going to be running through the Q&A button. Feel free to submit a question at any time during the talk. It won't interrupt anything. They'll just keep kind of compiling at this point. Second, if you are a student here for Path or Aviate credit, since this is a webinar, you're not going to be able to see your own face, so don't worry about that. That's not how we're kind of taking attendance, if you will. Instead, at the end, we're going to distribute a Google link, which is where you will respond to questions concerning what you've learned during this panel today or this seminar today. And that's how you will receive credit. So at the end, we'll go ahead and make that information available to you. Third, we have one more session today. This is our second day of programming. At 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will be putting on a panel entitled Representing Indigeneity and Social Media with Brooke Thompson, Conahus Manuel, and Aaron Wise. So if you're interested, we've got a lot of great programming for you today. Finally, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker for this afternoon. Dr. Joshua B. Nelson is a citizen of Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma and is the director of the Film and Media Studies Department, an associate professor of English, and affiliated faculty with Native American Studies and Women and Gender Studies at the University of Oklahoma. His research focuses on American Indian film and literature, and his book, Progressive Traditions, Identity in Cherokee Literature and Culture, interrogates the false binary of assimilated versus traditional that is ascribed to Indigenous literatures, and instead explores the empowering potential of traditional adaptive strategies and practices to address cultural and historical dilemmas. Dr. Nelson's accomplishments extend beyond his scholarship and teaching, as he is an organizer for the Native Crossroads Film Festival, which draws creators, academics, and tribal representatives from across the globe to the University of Oklahoma to screen unique films and engage in dialogue about Indigenous media. He serves as an interviewer, narrator, and co-producer on the forthcoming PBS documentary, Searching for Sequoyah, directed by James Fortier, who's a Ojibwe, and produced by Leanne Howe, who's a Choctaw writer and scholar. This film is an in-depth look into the mystery of what became of the inventor of the Cherokee syllabary, Sequoyah, and his final journey to Mexico. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Joshua Nelson.
All right. Thanks very much, Shannon. It's wonderful to see you. One quick update. I am no longer the chair of film and media studies. I'm a ordinary professorial citizen these days, which suits me just to a T. I enjoyed my time there and got to, I think, get better at working on films from a critical and a productive angle. But now I don't have to sign nearly as many forms as I once did. And I'm told that there are a lot of people in the audience. That's a little weird for me and a touch disconcerting. Typically when I give a talk like this, I'm accustomed to, maybe 10 people max in the room. So this is a new thing, having people around paying attention to me. If I falter, perhaps you'll say a quick word of encouragement. Let's get into business here. Enough with the preliminaries, maybe. And I'm going to do my level best here to share my screen for our presentation. All right, hopefully you can see this. This is Paving the Way. It's a little bit about Native film from the film festival side of things, and then a little bit on the work that I've been doing with James and Leanne on Searching for Sequoyah on the production side. So I'll try to keep trucking through this to be sure that we've got time for questions at the end, should I give rise to any. I took this picture just 2 days ago. I was pretty excited about it. This is not in Cherokee country. This is down in Choctaw country, down at Beaver's Bend, where the cypress trees grow like they do in Louisiana. But I thought it worked out not too bad for today's theme. So what can I tell you about the Native Crossroads Film Festival? We started this about 9 years ago. We weren't able to run it this past spring like we typically do because of the outbreak. The idea was born by my colleagues here at OU, Vicki Sturdivant, who is in Film and Media Studies, and Kristen Dowell, who's now at Florida University there. She was over in anthropology. And we were all sort of thinking that it would be really nice to be able to see the Native films that get made that we keep hearing about from our friends and colleagues on Facebook, but we never got a chance to get around to them. And so we went digging for a little bit of money. We found some around the university here and there, and decided that a festival was maybe the best way to go about things. The real problem with a lot of Native film is the distribution networks are just not there, particularly for short films where people have, a chance to kind of cut their teeth and perfect their art before they go on to make larger films. And the only place to see those short films is on the film festival circuit. And we didn't really have a good stop here in Oklahoma. So with a little bit of money thrown at acquiring the public screening rights for the films and then bringing the filmmakers in, we've been able to put together a pretty solid run here that goes on for about 2.5 days. And we have been really proud to host some of the biggest names in American Indian film and bring them to campus to interact with our students, put them in touch with our local tribal communities and with our scholars, and really just get to see the films. So once we've got them in hand too, then we can bring them into our classes. And but more importantly, we get audiences from the central Oklahoma region to turn out in pretty good numbers, healthy numbers. Nothing like 400 and whatever odd are here. That's, geez, still kind of creeping me out. But the thematic focus is something that we've always tried to emphasize. So here we've got an emphasis on rhythms. This is Jesse Ed Davis, famous Kiowa guitarist, indigenous futurism here. And then very broadly, Warriors was our canceled theme for this past year. So one of the things that we're trying to do with the film festival too is cultivate a scholarly discourse around the works. So if you go to nativecrossroads.org, you'll see that nearly all of our programs are still available. I think the only one that we haven't got up is Rhythms or maybe it was Futures. We've got a PDF glitch, but we'll get that fixed. And so if you go there, you'll find that there are synopses for all of these films, and there's information about who did the directing, the time, that sort of thing. So I frequently hear from my colleagues, gee, wouldn't it be great? I'd love to show Native films in class. Can you recommend something pertinent? And this hopefully opens a pathway for people to do that on their own. They can, of course, still contact me, but the idea here is that we just want to help showcase the fantastic work that's been done for many good years now. So this is a glimpse of what that website looks like. Again, I think, yeah, rhythms may be the one that's a little glitchy. Everything else is up there, so you can find what it is that we're after. Ideally, what I'd like to see us start doing before too long is encouraging more film reviews done, for instance, by my graduate students and others. We need a scholarly discourse to go along with the viewing of these films too. We don't have a wonderful venue for that. One day, if things went really perfectly and we could get all of the lawyers on board, I'd love to be able to host some of these short films or feature-length films on our website, but those permissions are complicated. And certainly we don't want to get in the way of filmmakers who are trying to distribute their films through more traditional venues like Netflix or HBO or what have you. So that remains perhaps still a little bit of a far-off goal. But these reviews and this ability to generate conversation about these films is something that I think we could do more or less overnight. And honestly, I would be absolutely happy to have these written by thoughtful folks anywhere. So if you're working on Native films, you've got a good review in mind, let me know. Let's see if we can't get a review up there for you and get you a line on your CV. The thematic focus for the film festival is a little bit of a hook, just a way to kind of distinguish what it is that we do from some of the other major film festivals, like, say, Imagine Native or the American Indian Film Festival out in San Francisco. But one of the things that we really do try to do that also sets us apart is to emphasize Oklahoma Native filmmakers. And we're a curated festival. That means that we don't really take open submissions. That would just be an enormous amount of work that none of us have time to do. And so we have done it on a very limited basis, but only for Oklahoma Native filmmakers. So we periodically issue a call and just ask for folks out there in OK to let us know what they're working on and see if it's something that they would like to submit. And we've had pretty good luck with that. In the past, we've seen work by sort of groundbreaking filmmakers like Bob Hicks. He did a film called The Dawes Act just before he passed. We were hooked up with Jeffrey Palmer, who's an OU alum, several years before he came out with Words from a Bear, the documentary about N. Scott Momaday that hit PBS this past year. Sterling Harjo didn't need our help. He was already well established by the time we got around to Native Crossroads. But he's been very generous and very kind to bring us short films, things that he's just kind of got as projects that are near and dear to him. And as we've gone on, so maybe some of these names aren't familiar to you. So I wanted to offer up a few of these. Four Sheets to the Wind is Harjo's first feature. Barking Water on the left side of the screen is his second, and Miko is his latest feature film. All fantastic. And most of these you can now find on various streaming platforms. As we've gone on, we've hooked up with other emerging filmmakers. One of my very favorite people is Stephen Paul Judd, a Kiowa Choctaw filmmaker. And I wanted to just show you this quick little thing that he did. I love that. I think that's just fantastic work. One of the things that I especially love about it is exemplifies to me in many ways one of the central strengths of American Indian filmmaking, and that's to use the tools that are at hand. You don't have to have a giant budget. You really just need to have some basic tools and a will to make something happen. It doesn't help to have some, wonderful humor and some skill, the way that Stephen Bull Judd does and I don't. But that do-it-yourself ethos is just absolutely inspiring to me. Let me show you. Oh, well, let's see. I can't show you this. But this, if you haven't seen it, is also by Stephen Paul Judd. It's called Ronnie Bodine. It's starring Wes Studi. It may be one of the very funniest films that we've ever showed at Native Crossroads. It's absolutely fantastic. And it was hard to get your hands on for a good while. But as of right now, it's showing, I think, on Vimeo. So the address is down there, and we're recording this, so maybe we can get that to you. So throw some traffic Stephen Paul Judd's way, and enjoy. I think you'll be happy that you did. That's him in the blurry background in the red shirt there. In front is Kyle Bell, who is a Muskogee Creek filmmaker who came out to Native Crossroads one year. He's one of my sort of happiest memories of Native Crossroads. He submitted a film to us in one of those open calls, and he said that he just sort of happened in to Native Crossroads the year before, heard some of the folks speaking. I think Sterling Harjo may have been there. And Kyle just said, if these folks can do it, I don't see why I can't. And so he was inspired to start making films, and is now making a bunch of them and winning awards in the doing thereof. So, in some ways, that's really what's behind a lot of what Native Crossroads is up to. These other folks are local filmmakers worth keeping an eye on. And so one of the places that maybe you can see some of these Native films, if you can't get on the festival circuit, is on places like Vimeo, just by searching these names. Sorry, my dog got bored, hit the road. But you might also find that you are not far from a film festival. So what I'd recommend is going to imaginenative.org. This is the premier film festival for Indigenous works in North America, and it's run out of Toronto. And they do just a really fantastic job of helping spread the word. So if you go to their webpage, they've got a list of festivals that's really quite comprehensive. So we've also been showing some sort of more institutionally backed films here lately. The Chickasaw Nation in particular has invested heavily, and they've financed 2 feature-length films to date, Pearl and Teata. And they are finishing up. They're in post-production, I understand now, on Chickasaw Rancher. ChickasawFilms.com can clue you into more there. OCO TV is a Cherokee Nation sponsored project. They show on PBS stations here in Oklahoma. These are some of their lead folks. That's Jeremy Charles on the left, Jennifer Lauren, and then Sterling Harjo. And then this is, I believe, Allison Herrera, who's doing some interviewing for them here at Native Crossroads. So if you go to OCO TV, you can see these profiles that they've been doing of Cherokee people for the past several years now. One of the, again, kind of backstage projects for Native Crossroads is to help train up future American Indian filmmakers. So Jolene Scott is a Cherokee graduate student who is working with us here at the university. And we put her to work doing some of the PR stuff for Native Crossroads. And she cut this trailer for us that we'll try to get to play for you. So, we're basically just working on some editing stuff here, but this is the kind of thing that like film festivals need to have, right? And these are legitimate real world chops that Jolene is cultivating here. And just as a way of self plug, that's me butchering Link Ray Rumble on the guitar there. You don't have to listen to it again. In the same way that I would like for us to cultivate a discourse in the critical literature, we can also perhaps use Native Crossroads and the student preparation to help cultivate a discourse around, for instance, the art that we use. We try to contract with local artists for our posters and our programs and promotional materials.
Music is art, and what I think of hip hop culture, which graffiti is a part of, and that was some of my early roots. I think they kind of intermesh and intertwine, and music is a huge influence for me. I actually keep a lot of music on in the studio when I work. My name is Hocus Genendor. I have just entered my second semester of the MFA program here at the University of Oklahoma. And hearing that Rumble was tied into it, I was like, oh man, it just seemed like a perfect storm with my like for Jesse Ed Davis and his music. It all kind of tied together.
Getting a little further into that pipeline preparation for Native filmmakers, we established the Indigenous Media Institute here at OU. It's a little bit on hiatus now as I'm rolling out a film and media studies and trying to finish up a couple of other projects. But eventually the idea is that we will, in essence, use our students to go out to area high schools. We've done this once before with the Citizen Potawatomi Nation out in Tecumseh, Oklahoma. So we take our students out and put them in touch with local high school students who are interested in filmmaking. So they take charge of the instruction, which makes them better students as well as teachers. And convince them, hopefully, that they don't always have to go into healthcare fields or into STEM fields if that's not where their heart lies. That creative humanities focused projects are legitimate interests as well. And what I'd like to see us do there eventually is get our students collaborating, encourage them as a kind of a recruitment effort to come to OU, work with us, make Indigenous films, and eventually take those on the road. I think we're not far off from taking our students' works to places like Imagine Native, or certainly showing them at Native Crossroads and other American Indian film festivals. I'd like to show you just part of one that my students here made, called Grandmother's Little Butterfly. And we probably don't have time for all of it, but I'll just summarize. The first part of this is a grandmother talking to a granddaughter in the Osage language about dance traditions. And we see the granddaughter getting interested in that. The sound on this is very soft.
Comme existe. Comme c'est comme. Comme c'est comme. Otas. Comme. Dale Wajawa. I want to reach it. Comme. Dale. Ditiko. Wati Biombe. Fancy word answer call. Intati wita awati gonze mingshe. Bustles owanaji mingshe. When I was young, about 6 years old, one time your grandfather took us to a powwow in Cleveland, Ohio. It was actually one of the first AIM powwows. I was inspired by fancy shawl dancing when I seen it, and when we went home, I started dancing in a towel. Your great-grandpa told me to be creative with my feet, my arms, and move to that drum beat. You should be light on your feet, like you're flying. You must move your shawl like the way a butterfly moves its wings. Remember, you are the butterfly. Indati wakanda Wakanda, Ijinke, Hampade, Shi, Owikia, Dak A, Wadapi, Izaki, Stompapi, Wanida, Lita, Ilape, Angade, Wadapi, Upi, and Gatsi, Wakanda, Shana.
I think that's just a beautiful piece. I think it's really touching, and it's very thoughtful, and it suggests some of the things that could come together eventually if we continue to take this kind of work seriously. There are language aspects here. There's an untranslated prayer at the end. There is a little bit of a language lesson at the beginning. We've got a 3-generation shot of continuity here in Osage traditions, all of which I think is just, again, really kind of inspiring. And touching in a lot of ways. So I'm so proud of these students. I'm proud to have played a part. The planning for the film festival, it turns out, takes more out of you than you think when you first had the idea that maybe, hey, let's have a festival. Like Mickey Rooney putting on a show. It turns out it's complex. What's made it absolutely manageable is a raft of volunteers who have helped us put this together. I have the uncommon advantage of working with a fellow named Carl Schmidt, who works at Film and Media Studies there in the department, who brings just a wealth of technical skills. He manages all of the technological dimensions of showing these films that come to us in a variety of formats. So, if you're thinking maybe you would put on a festival, these are maybe some things that you might consider. The technical requirements that you've got to have. Filmmakers like to see their work shown in the way that it's sort of meant to be shown. They want a big screen. They want good sound. They want a projector that shows the detail that they put a lot of thought into preparing. You need somebody at the front desk. You need somebody who knows how to write a press release. You need somebody who knows how to turn on Twitter, unlike me. You need somebody who can put together all of the releases and the forums that the university has to have to get them paid. And you need somebody to raccoon herd, as I call it, because filmmakers are smarter than cats and they're wilier. But getting your filmmakers to the venue on time and being sure that they're being treated hospitably is a really important dimension. People, hate to say it, don't always flock to Central Oklahoma, but when they come here, we really want to make sure that they have been treated courteously and treated well. And our volunteers are the ones who really do make that happen. To find content, so certainly you can go to Native Crossroads and grab anything that looks good to you. Get in contact with me and our crew, and we can put you in touch with the distributors or the producers. What we do when we're programming is straight up steal ideas from Imaginative and any other film festivals we go to. We sometimes send folks down to a festival in Morelia, Mexico, for Central and South American content. But basically, we let those people, God bless them, do the heavy work of sifting through the open calls. And then we just go up and we grab what we like and we bring it back. It is unabashedly theft on my part. But all that to say, too, if you can get to places like Imaginative, by all means, go. They do just the best work. The venue technology, this is, again, about projectors and things like that. One of the places where we've had the most success with Native Crossroads is in partnering with our local community organizations. The public library, the School of Music puts on events that tie in really nicely with ours oftentimes. We've got singing groups, Native hymn singers, Native drum groups, others that we, whenever we've got any money, we try to give it right back to them to come in and offer up, just an added dimension for what we're trying to do with our festival. When it comes time to putting together the program, these are some of the things that I try to bear in mind. And I'm not the exclusive programmer. Carl Schmidt, Sunrise Tipicani, who is right there, who is a filmmaker and an instructor here at OU, have also helped out with this. But we're always conscious of the gender of the filmmaker. We're conscious of what tribe the films are coming from. We're looking for diversity across this spread. We're looking for diversity in region. The biggest challenge here is not letting Canada dominate. They have such a fantastic funding structure up there, and they have such visionary filmmakers. It would be really easy to just show nothing but Canadian films for 2.5 days. But down here, we want to be sure that our films are speaking to our local audiences as well. In terms of genre, we tend to privilege narrative films. There's a lot of documentary work on American Indian folks, so we don't want to get too heavy on that. We also often feel like we need to provide some context for the films that we're showing on screen. And so one of the ways that we do that is, rather than just have one person, be it a director or a scholar or somebody else, offer up some commentary, we typically offer a slate of short films that run for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then a Q&A with some combination of people. We want to put filmmakers, scholars, and community reps into conversation with one another and talk about a variety of angles coming into American Indian film. Again, because I think the scholarly context opens itself to a variety of scholarly angles. You can come at this material from a variety of places. So our scholars come from geology, they come from English, from film, they come from anthropology, from political science, et cetera. It really runs the gamut, and that's precisely the way that we want it. We also try to bring in industry professionals, people who know about funding, for instance, and know about funding opportunities, to try to let people know about what they could pull off. So with that, we'll just, again, take a hard ride here and talk about something utterly different. Now this, as they say. So I've been working on this film, Searching for Sequoyah, a documentary with James Fortier and Leanne Howe, who are heavy hitters and were kind enough to take on a rank amateur in me to work on this doc. Let me just show you the latest 3-minute trailer so you can ignore me for a bit and just dig this.
Sequoyah's story is one that resonates with Americans. He works perfectly into this American pull yourself up by your bootstrap kind of story.
Sequoyah has always been a giant mythic figure in Cherokee history.
Sequoyah is really the first Cherokee genius.
Sequoyah represents Cherokee ingenuity at its finest. Cherokee perseverance at its most intense.
No one person has ever created a writing system in 5,000 years of human civilization. So it was an incredible feat, not only for the Cherokee, but for humanity.
We have a few heroes in our history, but Sequoyah is that one that we always want our kids to know about.
He's been mythologized. He's less a person or a man than an icon.
He's this big figure in Cherokee life. Everybody knows who he is.
Sequoyah shows up in the documents far more than many Cherokee people, and yet doesn't show up enough for us to piece them together.
The man that invented the Cherokee writing system left behind very little written records, handwritten by himself.
It's a really unique contradiction in terms of who the man was versus what his achievements were.
He was an artist, he was a soldier, he was a politician, he was a diplomat.
From his birth, which no one knows quite the date, to his death, no one quite knows. So his entire life is shrouded in mystery.
People said he was crazy. People said he was doing something that was wrong. Yet here we are 200 years later, still talking about him.
He believed in the Cherokee people and believed in what the syllabary could do to keep us going.
Like much of Sequoyah's life, Sequoyah's death is heavily mythologized.
No one knows exactly where he died. No one's ever found the body.
I don't know what will happen when you go to search for Sequoyah in Mexico.
And when we find his grave, when we find his descendants, when we find people who are carrying stories about him,
When we search for Sequoyah, we search not just for the historical person, but we search for what he came to symbolize.
Because in a lot of ways, the search for Sequoyah is the search for us.
So James has been hard at work. The guy is doing just about everything on this film. He is a one-man operation, and I'm really overly impressed with what all he's able to do. He's directing, he's doing sound, he's doing the editing, he's doing the color, and really, I think this is coming together quite nicely. And if everything goes according to plan, yeah, we should see a national broadcast, hopefully, about this time next year. So even though the film's almost already done, PBS, of course, has been programming quite a ways out. So we've got to get in line, and hopefully we'll find some good local stations as our kind of sponsors as we go ahead. So I'll tell you a little bit more about the film and Sequoyah. I won't go into a thorough biography here, but basically we want to emphasize the search dimension of this. There's a kind of a hook, right, that we're using to entice people into watching a documentary here. This detective angle is something that we quite consciously doubled down on as a novel approach in some ways to documentary storytelling. We also wanted to do things slightly differently stylistically. We do have some talking heads. We talk to prominent scholars, people who know their way around the Cherokee language and Cherokee history quite well. But stylistically, we tried a few other things. You saw the reanimation scenes in the trailer. You saw animations that are done by Joseph Erb, a Cherokee digital artist. We've got two, I think, something that I really tried to champion in conversations with James and Leanne is a kind of dialogic approach to the conversations that we have. I think when we're watching films, unlike right now, we're accustomed to seeing people talk to one another, and there's a kind of voyeuristic pleasure in eavesdropping on somebody else's conversation. And so I wanted, where we were able to put people into conversation, and oftentimes that's unfortunately for the audience, me talking to other people. But some of the folks that we talk to are just really fascinating, wonderful people. Many of them are direct descendants of Sequoyahs. And Winnie Guest Perdue, who you saw in the trailer, the older woman, is just one of the most delightful humans on the planet. She is just marvelous. And so you'll get to know her in the film as things go on. She traveled with us down to Mexico on this trip. We talked with Roy Boney, a fantastic Cherokee artist, and many more. I'll talk more about them in a second. So back to the story about Sequoyah. So we've got this kind of famous portrait of his that kind of nearly all other portraits are based on. As it turns out, this one is a copy, the original burned. And there are many accounts, primarily oral accounts in Cherokee country, that say that this wasn't Sequoyah at all, that he did not want to sit for a portrait. And so he sent somebody who looked most like him in his stead. So, we really don't know exactly what he looked like. There's a lot that we don't know about Sequoyah, but we've been trying to piece together what we do know for this film. So as you saw in the trailer too, at the end of his life, Sequoyah left Indian Territory. He was one of the old settlers originally. He was in the western part of Arkansas ahead of the Trail of Tears. After the Trail of Tears and removal of the bulk of the nation to Indian Territory, those Arkansas Cherokees reunited. A splinter group of Cherokees had moved down to the Republic of Texas in late 1820s, early 1830s. Around the time of the Texas Revolution, they get booted out of Texas and they move on down into Mexico. And the Cherokees went with them. And so the kind of most popular account of why Sequoyah left Indian Territory, the Cherokee Nation, to go to Mexico was to persuade that group of Cherokees to reunite with the newly reunited larger group of Cherokees up in what would become Oklahoma. We don't know that for a fact. We don't have great accounts of why he left. But periodically, there have been some trips down to Mexico to see if people could find out what became of him. There was a sort of well-sponsored trip in the 1930s and another one in the 1950s. And no one, again, has yet found exactly what it is that we're looking for. Most accounts tend to think that Sequoyah and the Cherokees went to this town, Zaragoza, outside of Piedras Negras. So you'll see here, to kind of orient yourself, this is San Antonio. And if you follow along through here, you hit the border. And then, 35 minutes or so by car, a little on to the southwest, you come up to Zaragoza. One of the key accounts here, you might also take note of this other town, Nacimiento de los Negros. This is about 2 hours further on from Zaragoza. One of the reasons that we think Zaragoza is from this account by the Worm. This was published after Sequoyah's passing in the Cherokee Advocate. And it was originally in Cherokee, it was translated. But in that account, the Worm uses a town named San Cranto, C-R-A-N-T-O. No one's been able to find a San Cranto. We think it's a transliteration of San Fernando. People looking for San Fernando have looked around in a lot of places. As it turns out, there are a couple of San Fernandos. So historian Stan Hoig puts the Cherokees way down south on the Gulf of Mexico. I think that's probably not right. Zaragoza's original name was San Fernando. It was changed many years later. We're still not totally sure, though. The Worm's account also talks about the kind of country they would be traveling through. It must have been an incredible journey. Imagine in 1842. Actually, I think this date is wrong. I think this was published in 1846. Imagine Sequoyah in his mid to late 60s traveling by horseback through hostile country, hostile from the Texans, hostile from the Comanches. There are a variety of other tribes that they encounter on their way down. It must have been an incredible journey, and one that took some real gumption, for this elderly man to undertake. So he says that the Comanches told them that the way to the Cherokee settlement would be rough and mountainous. This is something that I've always sort of wondered about and not quite figured my way through. We'll come back to that in a second. Digging through the archives, I came across this account. So this is an account of one of the trips down looking for Sequoyah in the 1950s. And this fellow, Juan, we don't have a last name, was sort of sent in to the sponsor of the trip, who was up at the Smithsonian, John Harrington. Here, Juan says that the expedition has been looking in the wrong place, he thinks. This fellow Harrington thought that he had incontrovertible proof that he could find the exact spot where Sequoyah was laid to rest. He doesn't say exactly what that proof is. I found it a little bit later. But one of the things that he says they're going to be looking for is a grave site, a cemetery that is sort of bordered by some chalky cliffs. That's what he describes in this highlighted section here. My former graduate student, Amanda Cuellar, who now teaches at Doña Ana community college in New Mexico, did the translating. Her partner, Oscar Esparza, did some geological investigations for us. So we were asking about chalky cliffs and what that might look like. Oscar got to work and he pulled up all these fantastic maps that he had access to through his job at the Geological Survey. And so he's thinking that this Austin chalk stuff is more what we ought to be looking for. And you're not going to find a lot of that around Zaragoza. Chances are good you might find it further down here. And this is about where Nacimiento de los Negros is, north of Musquis. So around Zaragoza, things look like this. It's mesquite plains, right? If you make your way further down towards Musquis, Nacimiento de los Negros, you start to see this mountainous country, right? And that maybe accords a little bit more with the Worms account. So why Nacimiento? Well, as it turns out, on one of our scouting trips, we come across this, which came as an utter shock to me. I had no idea this is what I was stumbling into. El Nacimiento, Tribu Negros, Mascogos y Seminoles. This is a maroon town. The people who live here are the descendants of slaves owned by the southeastern Indians of the United States, particularly the Muskogee and the Seminole. They arrived sometime after Sequoyah's trip. But where they moved to there in Nacimiento is very near the Kickapoo Reservation in Mexico. So as it turns out, the Kickapoos lived with the Cherokees, Choctaws, and others in a intertribal town in Texas before the Republic of Texas and its revolution. So it was a very kind of polyglot place. And the Cherokees and the Kickapoos would have gotten to know each other relatively well. So I think there was, some compelling evidence that said, maybe go down, take a look around Nacimiento and see what you come up with. It was really spectacular country. We didn't make it all the way up into those mountains, which is one thing that I still regret. And if I can ever break away, we'll head back there. I'll sort of give away a little bit right at the beginning. We find nothing particularly compelling about Nacimiento. One of the things that we read in the archival materials from the 1950 search and that we saw on our own is that many of the graves in Mexico look about like what you see here. So, you might go down looking for a giant marker saying, aha, Cherokee genius lies here. Chances are good that he lied instead in an unmarked grave just covered by stones that might well have been covered up over the many years interceding. It doesn't help that there are pretty significant mining operations down around Musquis as well that have dramatically altered that landscape since the Industrial Revolution. So there's still plenty of evidence pointing us back towards Zaragoza. Kids were playing in the creek that day, and they gave us some of the most beautiful smiles I've ever seen for this shot. We went digging back into the archives and read up on this 1950s search. And here, Omer Morgan, who's leading this search, says he's found the house where Sequoyah died. And it's outside of Zaragoza. So, it took some considerable digging to come up with some of these documents. They're not held by just every library in the world. But as it turns out, the Cherokee Heritage Center in Tahlequah has this original photo. You might imagine my excitement coming across this one. I was pretty tickled, right? Along with this map that describes where it is that they ought to be heading. So We dig around a little bit more. We find some more evidence. We're treating all of these things in the film like clues, right? These are leads that we're going to try to follow. There are many others that I think make for an exciting story. Skeletons found in caves, fraud, all sorts of marvelous ways to draw people in. There's this rock that's among Omer Morgan's documents, where they say this is the cornerstone of the old Cherokee house. And people think that these are Cherokee inscriptions on the rock. And I don't know. This looks a little bit like the character for Doe, only Doe typically does not have this bar. This looks like the character for A. These don't look like much at all Cherokee, either in Sequoyah's original syllabary or in the Romanized version that they used for typesetting. So things are getting complicated. All of that kind of points in many ways to what I call the sort of cultural Heisenberg effect here. That is to say that the observation of these phenomenon changed the phenomenon. When we got down to Zaragoza, we discovered we were not the first since the 50s to go down looking around to see what might be seen there. Hanging in the museum of the town of Zaragoza is a set of photo documents describing this visit by what's called the Cherokee Nation of Mexico. These folks were not actually from Mexico, they were from Texas, but they were interested in exploring connections that they might have with Mexico, with Sequoyah, and with others. By some accounts, they were interested perhaps in getting land donated to them to establish a reservation in Mexico. It's worth perhaps noting that there are 3 federally recognized Cherokee tribes in the United States. There's the Cherokee Nation that's headquartered in Tahlequah, the United Kituwa Band of Cherokee Indians also in Tahlequah, and the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians out in Cherokee, North Carolina. And then there are a host of other folks who claim Cherokee heritage, but are not federally recognized. Many of them may have Cherokee heritage. Many of them certainly do not. And this is a complicated history that I don't have much time to go into. Suffice it to say that when we look at this photo, we see a menagerie of sort of invoked traditions that don't necessarily have much to do with Cherokee traditions. So we've got sort of otter skin braid here. We've of course got the breastplate, the otter skin from more of an Osage tradition, breastplate and regalia like the headdress from Plains tribes, the peace pipe from Plains tribes, the yellow tinted sunglasses, as I've said in the past, I think derives more from the Burt Reynolds tradition than it does from a Cherokee tradition. So I'll just put it this way. I don't know that these folks have much organic connection to the federally recognized Indian Cherokee communities with which I'm familiar. And we'll leave it at that. But that they were down there visiting, talking to people seems to have altered the narrative in many ways that prevails in Zaragoza. And this Heisenberg cultural principle kind of cuts both ways. We will surely find that our having been down there rooting around will in some ways color the narrative as well. And we must know that we didn't do everything right? We didn't get all of our facts exactly straight. We didn't learn everything that we could have. All of these investigations are necessarily incomplete. And hopefully we have done less harm than we have good in the storytelling. But one of the things that we discovered was that it would not be in anyone's best interest for us to continue on searching for the grave that Sequoyah might have come to land in. this was really driven home when we started hearing from one of the landowners who thought that he had a cave in which Sequoyah might well have been buried, that he was contemplating having it excavated. And that got us to thinking, maybe it's time to pull up here. I can't imagine living with myself knowing that, who knows what might motivate, if not this landowner, a future landowner, to try to draw tourists in to visit the famous Indian burial site, right? It's just, this kind of nightmare that started to plague us, that our going would again dramatically alter the narrative, and maybe the way that we would like that narrative to end. So in many ways, like I tried to emphasize early on, the substance of our story is really not so much what happened to Sequoyah, or at least Sequoyah's body, but more what happens with Sequoyah. What happens to the legacy that he leaves us, especially in terms of art, of language, of communicativeness. What happens with the legacy that he leaves to us of diplomacy and connection with people who may indeed be far flung. We tried to celebrate that by showcasing the work of people like Joseph Erb with his animations, of Roy Boney in his art, of John Ross, who is continuing work on Sequoyah's numbering system that he developed as a companion to his writing system. To the sculpture of Verna Bates, and to the storytelling of Sequoyah Guess, these latter two, also direct descendants of Sequoyah's, to the history of outreach and education that Winnie Guess Purdue brings in her legacy. So hopefully, all said and done, our film too will contribute in some small way to that legacy as well. I'll show you just one last little teaser here of one of the things that we found when we went back in the Zaragoza area, in the neighboring town of Morelos, in its cemetery. I can tell you this was not really what we expected to see when we arrived in Morelos, but it does look like Cherokees have been down there and may still abide in some ways. So hopefully there will be a little bit more to learn, and hopefully you'll want to hear about it when the film comes out. So with that, I'm going to call it done and be happy to field any questions.
Thank you so much. So our Q&A thread is open, but I think that, I'm sure as I do, that Teresa and Tom have questions as well that they might want you to field. So one thing, this was a bit of a deep cut, but I was hoping you might touch upon it. You mentioned the Burt Reynolds sunglasses, and I've heard you speak about this before, but could you talk a bit about, and this ties into a greater conversation, the dubious legacy of very white people playing indigenous people in films, and how important it is to have indigenous people behind the camera, in front of the camera, in the editing room, doing the animations, providing the music, and doing things like that, why that is so important.
Oh, wow, what a really good question. As it turns out, somebody from a paper just wrote me asking similar questions about, somewhat similar. Let me just sort of point to Burt Reynolds in Navajo Joe. I don't know if anyone's ever seen this spaghetti Western that he was in before he made it big and famous. He doesn't play a particularly compelling Native person on that show. We think of Henry Brandon in The Searchers. We think of Ricardo Montalban in Cheyenne Autumn, Elvis Presley in Stay Away Joe. They didn't make great Native characters, right? And that was drawn into incredibly stark relief for my money with Chief Dan George in, for instance, Little Big Man. So a story not written by or directed by a native, but commanded by Chief Dan George's performance. And seeing someone so authentic, just sort of from head to toe in their gesture, right, in their intonation, in their delivery, just showed us in no uncertain terms how very deficient all those other red-facing performances had been. And I think even mainstream audiences from that point forward said, oh, yeah, quit giving us this ersatz nonsense. Show us real people. Show us what real stories look like. And I think that really, in some ways, kind of inspired not just native performers, but also native cinephiles who would then go on to direct and produce and edit and score, et cetera. And I think in some ways, Smoke Signals offers another kind of analogous watershed moment. I still remember seeing Smoke Signals or reading This Is What It Means to Say Phoenix, Arizona for the first time back in the 90s. And it was a turning point, right? It inspired me to think differently about what could be done in the representational world. It communicated to me, and I think perhaps to many, many others, for the very first time, your stories have value and ought to be taken seriously. So in many ways, then, it's those relatively small shifts, right? Get an Indian to play an Indian, that in many ways, I think kind of launched an entire brand new, innovative, and rewarding representational system.
Well, we do have a few student questions. The first one, and I do love this one, wants to know if you play guitar, because I think you referenced it, and would perhaps like to learn a little bit more about that.
Yeah, badly, really badly. I take Neil Young kind of as my, turning point model for guitar playing. I saw him do a performance on Saturday Night Live, where he was just breaking strings right and left, just beating the tar out of that Les Paul. And so I always, thought, okay, yeah, I can definitely break strings, right? If I can't quite get the chord right, at the very least, I can get that amp up to 11.
Well, I did love hearing rumble playing earlier, because I do love teaching the film rumble. Like, it's a fun look. Would you mind talking about that for a second? Just speaking of music and kind of what a film like Rumble brings to the forefront that maybe its predecessors didn't.
Yeah, there too, I think inspiration is the thing that it can most bring. Seeing just how cool that Link Ray strutting across the stage is. I mean, that guy just commanded that space. This works in so many ways, right? So again, so many of our students just have it kind of drilled into them that the only thing that they need to pay any attention to is a career in healthcare or in engineering or something like that. And yeah, if you're down with that, go nuts, do that thing. But there are other worthwhile pursuits. We need more Robbie Robertsons, shredding it out there. We need more Jesse Ed Davises, just killing it on a slide guitar, beating the tar out of the drums, making films. And one of the things that I haven't talked about now is my current project is a documentary film on the 45th Infantry Division in World War II. So this was a very native-heavy division of the Army that was in the European theater. And my interest in them got sparked by reading through some histories, and I stumbled across the name Jack Montgomery, who is a Cherokee fella who was awarded the Medal of Honor for actions at Anzio during World War II. And to read the account of what he did on that day, it's like reading, a Schwarzenegger screenplay. I mean, it was like superhuman, the stuff that this guy did on this day. He took like 32 German prisoners single-handedly. He took out 3 machine gun nests single-handedly. And I remember being angry at the time when I came across this, that I had never heard his name, that no one ever talked about him. And so, as it turns out, I think we can find those kinds of figures in Native history and culture just about everywhere. And I'm just, still a touch frustrated that too many people have never heard their names. They have never been offered up as an inspiration to young Native people who might aspire to similar heights as Jesse Ed Davis, as Jack Montgomery.
Yeah, I would encourage all of our students to check out that documentary because it is so fun. It's cool. You're going to see people where you have their music in your, however you access your music. I'm old, in your iTunes account, and you're going to go, oh, there you are. What have you been doing here this whole time? So with that in mind and thinking about inspiring amazing, like genius people, we did have a question from someone. What was Sequoyah's motivation for creating the Cherokee syllabary when he did, and what was the background there?
A lot of different stories about that, and we try to talk a little bit about it in the film. One of the common accounts is that during his military service in the War of 1812, he saw soldiers exchanging letters. And just sort of saw it happening and said, why not us? And apparently some folks made fun of him, said, no, the book's not for us. We're doing different things. We're warrior folks. We got the bow and arrow here. As it turns out, he was a silversmith, so he was a little more accustomed to working creatively, I think. So it sounds like in many ways that was kind of an inspiration. And there must have been some provocation in there too, right? Once he started, he didn't seem like the guy who was ever going to give up until it got to working, right? He labored on it for, over a decade before he got it together. Once it sort of hit, this is one of the effects. I don't think it was necessarily anything that Sequoyah had in mind as an inspiration, but it had the effect of helping the nation congeal in many ways. So prior to the 1820s, the Cherokees were basically confederated towns. There was not an overriding centralized governing apparatus. They felt like they needed to form one to counteract the colonialists' encroachments. And it looks like Sequoyah's syllabary had an enormous amount to do with that. It's not long after he invents it that the Cherokee Phoenix begins publication. And as Benedict Anderson has argued, it's in print capitalism that nationalism comes together and sort of exerts its most powerful influences. So I don't think Sequoyah was sitting around thinking, what we really need is form a nation. I'm going to, give us a language to do that. But he must have been thinking too, how do I communicate with my relatives who are far away from me? As an old settler, right? Maybe he wants to check in with people who are back in the old country.
His daughter was an integral figure in the development of the syllabary, wasn't she?
Yeah, Ioka. And I think we don't know exactly how old she was. I want to say like 8 to 10. She might have even been as young as 6, but I think she was closer to 8 to 10. So his first pupil by most accounts. And we spend a fair amount of time talking about her in the film too. And one of the people who really helps us enormously on this point is Julie Reed, a historian down at the University of Tennessee. And she does a really fantastic job of reminding us that, we need to be a touch careful about valorizing men's histories, individual men in particular. This is the way we've done history for a very long time, as if Sequoyah did this just entirely on his own. And he didn't. He had a lot of help as he went along and a lot of support. And to be sure, women's power is significant in Cherokee country. So I think that, we ignore the broader gendered networks within which Sequoyah was operating to our imperiled understanding.
So someone who's in the audience would like to know, what would you say has been the most rewarding part of your experience in filming the Sequoyah documentary?
I think that we made 2 trips down to Mexico. We did a first scouting trip, and then a second one where we went down for more robust filming. And we just kind of rolled into Zaragoza unannounced, and it was on a festival day. And we thought, well, we'll just go around and get some footage at different places. We got footage of the, cathedral there on the town square, and looked across the town square to the municipal hall. We thought, we'll drop in there. Why not? And we went rolling in, and the mayor of the town was there with several of his aides, and they embraced us with open arms. They could not have been more pleased to help us in any way they could. And they did help us in so many ways. They offered us help with drivers. We had trouble getting through a checkpoint with our rental car. We didn't have the right documentation, blah, blah, blah. But the folks at Zaragoza took care of us. They took us into their homes to feed us. They offered me an example of hospitality that put my former understanding to shame. I was embarrassed at how unhospitable a person I was after having spent time with those good people down there. It was utterly inspiring.
We have another person asking, why do you think we can't find or don't know as much about these important people in history in Indigenous cultures?
Oh boy.
That's a loaded one, I know.
Yeah. Why don't we know? I don't know. I try to be generous about my thinking along these lines. I continue to make references in my teaching to films that none of my students have ever seen. Make references to writings that none of them have ever read. And I have to remind myself, they've got a very short amount of time to pack that viewing and reading into. And, if I'm teaching a 19-year-old or a 20-year-old, they've had 5 years, in essence, to really get together a lot of these cultural reference. And in some ways, that's going to apply to all of us eventually, too. We've all got a finite amount of time. And the world's a big place, and history is a big place. So I think it's a challenge to get in as much as we would like to. Certainly, I haven't learned everything that I need to know before I'm done. I think if you're not in a place like Oklahoma, it makes a certain amount of sense. You might not know who Jack Montgomery is. If you're living in a place like Tahlequah, it's more of a sin, right? But our materials are finite. We can't all be producing content, right? We can't all be producing curriculum. We can't all be producing movies. And so we tend to gravitate to the low-hanging fruit. So that's hopefully an answer. It's not the answer I would give after a couple of drinks, but maybe it'll do for today.
I think it works for today, yes. We have another question from the audience. What projects do you think should be done in Native film, which you would accomplish if you had 7 lifetimes? I kind of like that framing. And in other words, what other projects would you see as ideas for future Native filmmakers?
Oh, that would be really presumptuous of me, I think. Not least because I'm not a very creative dude when it comes down to it. Better that folks like Stephen Paul Judd, Sterling Harjo, Kyle Bell, Kelly Mashburn, Randy Leclerc, those folks come up with those ideas. I sort of see my best role as trying to facilitate the steps that get them in the right position to make the films that they want to make. I think that's maybe what I'm best at. But to the question, one of the things that I think happened that was really, again, kind of inspiring was, and you were probably taking classes with me at the time. I made an argument for years based on films like Chris Ayres' Skins and Once Were Warriors, Alexi's A Business of Fancy Dancing, that there were certain genres that were closed off to Native filmmakers. Like they couldn't make a drug comedy. The field was just too overdetermined, too heavy laden with this cultural history. And then not all that long ago, Navajo filmmaker Black Horse Low came out with the film Chasing the Light. That is an outrageous and completely subversive and totally inappropriate drug comedy. And it's hysterical. As I say, I think, he apparently never caught my lectures. And so just, widely ignored that there were boundaries around what could or couldn't be done. And so in some ways, I'd like to see more Native filmmakers that utterly reject the expectations that perhaps are slowing them down in their creative vision.
We have another question here. I'm excited about this one. I'm creating a newsletter for Native American Heritage Month here at UD as a part of the Students Advocating for Gender Equality. Is it allowed if I provide Native Crossroads as a resource for students and faculty at UD to check out to learn about Indigenous film? Thank you for all of your hard work.
Oh, that's very kind. Yes, by all means. The problem, of course, is that basically we don't stream stuff right now. We contemplated doing a kind of pandemic version of Native Crossroads virtually, but it just got again a touch complicated with the lawyers. And so we don't want to, we don't want to take things away from filmmakers. So for instance, we try to pay as well as we can to bring filmmakers to campus and for screening rights, because we expect they're going to take that money and go make another film with it, right? And then that's generally what they're going to do. And so, maybe one day they do come across a distribution deal, but if somebody has pirated a version of the film that we screened virtually, we've become part of the problem. However you can use Native Crossroads, use away by all means, and maybe one day we can figure out ways that we can be more useful to you remotely. But one of the things that we can do perhaps is we link to people who have been able to do things virtually. Vision Maker, for instance, which is the sort of native arm of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting that's financing Searching for Sequoyah, has been doing several virtual screenings here lately. So if you follow us on Facebook, we try to repost that kind of stuff and just help direct traffic to where some of these other resources are.
Yeah, and like you mentioned earlier, Vimeo is a great place to find a lot of original Indigenous content, especially, and National Film Board of Canada, which you were talking about earlier, is a free resource, which is amazing. Yeah. And you just have to make a login to access a lot of their content, and right. You can just do these searches for, Indigenous content, and then like 65 options of subgenres will pop up and everything. And I know I'm telling you this, but I'm telling everyone. But
they got it going on.
Yeah, there's so many like great shorts on there. And so there's a lot of, just for students, especially listening, there's a lot of great content on there that's accessible, especially film shorts, especially by like younger visionary, directors or actresses who are kind of trying things for the first time. So
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Devery Jacobs.
I was just gonna say, yeah.
She's killer.
I'm still trying to figure out her Huff Lady one, but
right. And in addition to Vimeo, especially once you've hit on some names of folks whose work you like, just check out YouTube too. Increasingly, they're throwing it up there.
Mm-hmm. So another person asked, perhaps we've kind of already answered this, but what is your favorite part about filming? And I know we kind of touched on this a bit earlier, but with maybe some anecdotes, but just, I guess this experience of it and the collaboration aspect.
In some ways, like seeing some of these native films for the first time also kind of inspired me very late in life to think, maybe filmmaking is something that I could do too. And so now that I've been working on Searching for Sequoyah, and it's such a skeleton crew, you're called on to do several things. So some of the shots, for instance, in the trailer that you saw, I took, broke the camera out and got to play around a little bit. I did some of the drone footage. In fact, I killed a drone on this shoot down in Mexico. I don't know if we saw, did you see that there's a hot springs coming up out of the ground down in Mexico? I don't know if it's in the trailer or not. It's sort of bubbly, frothy white creek. Carl and I were trying to get some really up close zoom footage of, this drone sort of trucking along, and we got a little too close to the hot part of the hot springs, and the drone caught an updraft and it shot it up, and then it sailed back down real fast, and it ran into this concrete embankment and just went straight in the Drake.
So you didn't happen to get that on film, did you? Or
I do. So Mara,
documentary.
it should definitely make the bloopers real. But yeah, once it hits the water, the video is done. But
the idea of it just getting shot in the air.
It's kind of roller coastery. But yeah, picking up those technical skills along the way, learning about, how to run the camera, how to construct a shot. All that's been super valuable. Getting the sound right. So for instance, on the 45th documentary, I've gone in and I found some archival interviews with the folks that I'm most interested in highlighting, Montgomery and another Medal of Honor awardee, Ernest Childers. And as it turns out, again, like digging through the archives, I found a radio interview with Childers that was in like 1944, right after his actions for which he was awarded. And to hear those guys describe what they were doing in their own words and talk about the places that they'd come from is really moving. I think that's been the most rewarding part, again, is that kind of joy of discovery. Both of skills and of just that knowledge, that content.
To that end, someone wanted to know if you could say more about any connections that have been, if there were connections, but if there were, and if they have been maintained between Cherokees who moved to Mexico and Cherokees in the United States, and if there were any new discoveries along these lines during your travels to Mexico for the film. I guess beyond just the Heisenberg.
Not a lot of connections. The folks who have been much better connected across that border are the Kickapoos. They maintain very strong ties and regularly travel back and forth. One of the potential connections that we explore is via the Kickapoos. So for that, I'm not going to say a lot more. I'll try to keep some surprises in store. We talk some about that, and we talk some about potential familial tracings. But those honestly are they're still a bit obscure.
An attendee wanted to know how can we make sure that they can continue to learn more about Indigenous cultures without kind of seeking to Americanize the culture. So I think this is about appropriation, like what's the difference between maybe learning and appreciating versus appropriation?
Oh, I think that the way of framing the question is one of the best places to start with that. So being cognizant of the potential for appropriation, I think, is one of the very first best first steps. I don't know. I think a genuine engagement is one of the best things that one can do as well. And so, we get a lot of emails going around the university, people who are engaged on diversity, equity, and inclusion learning and pedagogy and that sort of thing. And one of those that we got recently, someone said it was about allyship, and they framed the question as saying, knowing when to speak up and when to be quiet. And in some ways, I think that's not totally unrelated. So as we're trying to learn about other cultures, as we're trying to learn about Native culture, maybe one of the first things we would do is be quiet for a bit and try to soak up as much as we can, and recognize that, in so doing, we're affording space for people to tell their own stories and not speak on their behalf. I hope that's helpful.
I think so. And I think I will go ahead and let this be our last question at this point. But someone wanted to ask what your favorite project is that you've worked on or that you have seen.
I don't know if I've got a favorite, but one that occurs to me now is a short film that Black Horse Low, the Navajo director that I mentioned earlier, did, called Shimasane, which means grandmother. And it's shot in black and white in the most gorgeous fabric of film. It's just immaculately rendered. And it's a story about two sisters growing up on a very remote section of the Navajo reservation. And one of them is forcibly carted off to school. And the other one has to stay home and help her grandmother with the sheep herding. And she doesn't want to stay and help with the sheep herding. And what she sees as sort of the middle of nowhere with nothing to do. There are these shots of her looking at her sister's textbook that's sort of encyclopedic with these shots of faraway places that she's entranced by. And at the end of the film, there's a sort of indeterminate moment of decision where she, is sort of looking at the horizon and contemplating heading out for it or potentially staying where she is. And that moment trapped in time and thinking about possibilities and a broader, wider world, contrasted with what is clearly a love she has for her family and for her grandmother, and responsibilities that she has to a home place that really formed her and shaped her. That tension, I think, is really touching, and in many ways inspiring. And in some ways, I think film is one of those generative kinds of text itself, right? It opens these sorts of doors for contemplating more robust ways of being or better ways of being. I think those moments where you stand on that precipice and feel that Sartrean kind of anxiety about the possibilities that are before you are some of my favorite moments in filmmaking and in the films that have been made.
Awesome. Well, I think that's the perfect note to end on. So thank you so much to Joshua Nelson for being here and for giving us your time and expertise today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're gonna go ahead and post the link to the questionnaire. It is posted now, so you all should have access to it who attended. And we're just really grateful that you were able to be a part of NPAC this year.
Oh, my pleasure. A real honor to be invited, and look forward to hopefully seeing many of you in person in the not too distant future. Hope you all take care of yourselves.
Yeah, thanks. You too.